welcome to this episode of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast, where me, one of your co-hosts, Dr. Joe Hamlett, and my esteemed colleague, Dr. Dave Peltz, talk to you about different topics, things to help you get to the next level. So with that, I'll just quickly introduce my colleague. Dave, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Joe. How are you doing? It seems like it's been a while, but it probably hasn't.
No,
We talk
I think
practically every day, so
right. I think when you sleep and then you wake up, it's like, when did we meet last?
yeah.
Yeah. So I know we're both getting up there in age, so our days, are not as distinctive as they were in the
Easy now,
past.
easy now, easy now. We got at least 20, 30 good years ahead of us.
I know. I know. All right, so enough of our shenanigans, but we do like to thank you for tuning in, our audience. We whether this is your first time or your long time listeners or viewers, thanks for tuning in to this episode. Again, we just want to assist you in your journey. That's why our title is Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast, because we all go through our own journeys. And like I said, we're just trying to help you so that you may not have to take that long and scenic route like me and Dave have. And that's okay if you want to take it. But again, it's up to you whether you want to choose to use some of these topics or things that we discuss. But enough on that. So, like in our normal fashion, one of us will introduce a topic and then we'll pass it on to our colleague so that they can get us started. So, with that, it's my turn to start us off today. So, the topic we're going to discuss today is Open the Aperture. So I know there's
Hmm.
probably thought on what does that mean?
Open
And
the
so
aperture.
yeah, so I'm going to pass it off to Dave to let him give his interpretation of what that means.
Sure, sure. And just for clarity, we're not talking about cameras or video devices. We're talking about the aperture up here, this
Yep.
aperture. Opening your app, open the aperture, open your mind, open your perspective, opening your thought process to the diversity of thought that's out there, the various views and perspectives, pros and cons, and weighing and considering everything so that you can make an informed decision and explore other opportunities that you may not have considered before. So when we talk about open the aperture, to me, it just resonates very much with, getting out of my current habits or stopping my current habits and thinking about what else could I be doing that could be better, because we all know what we know, and hopefully we know what we don't know, and we reach out to people instead of just making stuff up as we go along. So we find those people, we coordinate with them, and whether it's online, whether it's in person, whatever, and learn and keep our minds open to the possibilities of other things. And in one of the previous episodes, we talked about the tools that you have, and your past experiences, and how are you utilizing them to your advantage. And that's part of it, that opening the aperture. Maybe you have a skill set that you haven't used in a while, or that you don't like to use because you're bored of it, or you're tired of it, you're in a different spot in your life or career and you don't want to do that anymore. But there's still pieces that you can carry forward if you just open the aperture and perspective a little bit to say, hey, maybe I can capitalize on that. Maybe there's something I can use now that I hadn't thought about before. Is there something new that I can learn? Is there someone new that I can talk to? And Joe and I are always talking to people. We're always talking to people to see what we can learn, who we can help, who can, who's out there that wants to work with us. So I mean, there's just all kinds of possibilities when you open the aperture, take off those blinders, if you will,
Hmm.
thinking outside the box, which is kind of an antiquated euphemism, but this goes beyond that. This is like really broadening your mind and perspective to not just one possibility, but what are all the possibilities. I like to use the military briefings that I use for helping transitioning military members think of what they're going to do next. And some of them have great ideas, and some of them have a plan, and others, they're just not quite sure what to do. And that's the cool thing is that's not just unique to the military. That's anyone who's been displaced or laid off or is looking for their next opportunity, but they're bored or maybe don't want to do what they've been doing. Maybe you're tired of being a trainer or working in manufacturing or hospitality or healthcare or IT. What can you use that's within your wheelhouse and apply it differently? What environments can you apply that to? If you're, I'm going to give a scenario, you're doing IT in healthcare, but what about IT in the tech sector or in the education sector, in the manufacturing sector, and maybe it's not IT, maybe it's teaching IT, maybe it's teaching coding. So it's like, what can you use that you have and rebrand it or reinvent it or just reconfigure it into something new? That's why we have all these successful organizations. That's why we put people on the moon, supposedly or not supposedly, whatever your perspective is on that. So it's like we've done amazing things, but we would not have been able to achieve those amazing things if we had not opened the aperture to the possibilities. So that was a long intro. So I'm going to throw it back over to you, Dr. J.
No, that was great. You introduced a lot of different things, but I think one of the things that's common that we've said many times before is opening your mind to the possibilities. Opening your aperture is just that, just not. And you said this too, not leaving the blinders on, not stovepiping yourself and thinking only in one direction or one vision, one term, but to really, open up to just anything that could possibly happen. And that's what open it. And my thoughts are that opening the aperture is just that you're not limiting yourself. You're not, having any type of preconceived idea of something, just open to what comes. And I, me and Dave talked about this on one of our previous episodes. It's just the idea that once you get into that mindset, your mind really begins to swirl, because you really start to think about, how can I do this? How can this apply? How can I make this better? When should I apply this? You really just start to think, that anything is possible. And that's really, where we want you to be. And so I just kind of coined, and it's probably already been, used before, but I was just talking to Dave and other group of people on a call a couple of weeks ago. And I just thought this up, that I really kind of visualize myself as now a dream chaser. Dave shaking his head. Yeah, because that's really now the way I I envision myself as someone who's always looking for, not that I'm my head's in the clouds and I'm just, wanting to go to the moon or anything like that. But no, just the idea that if I dream it, if I work on it, if I apply myself, then I can probably, attain it. I could probably achieve that goal. And so that's what, again, when I think of being a dream chaser or someone that has opened the aperture, opened my mind to the possibilities, that's really what I think of. The sky is no longer the limit. I mean, it's just what you think you can do, you could possibly do. That's really what I have in my mind now. And that's the message I try to pass on to other people too, that there are going to be limiting factors. There are going to be things that are not going to, that are going to not assist you or help you get there. But then again, there's ways to get around them, overcome them, and to, step aside and let them go past you. But just opening your aperture to what if, those types of things is going to help you achieve those goals. It's going to help you get there. And so again, Dave said it before too, just applying all those tools that you had, retooling them, changing them to now they fit into something else, but just keeping your mind open to, what if I do this? What if I do that? What is the outcome going to be? And so that's what excites me. Again, me and Dave say this all the time. We don't know what we want to do when we grow up. Just like he mentioned, in his briefing with these transitioning military members, not sure what they want to do. That's okay. That's okay. It's just the idea that you're constantly thinking of, okay, how does this align? Even if you do kind of focus on a area, how can I apply with things I have in my toolbox? How can I apply the things that I have to that new thing? Again, keeping that aperture open to, okay, if I apply these things, if I adjust this, if I change this, if I move this, I can get there. And that's what it's about. And it goes back to, again, putting that power back in you. you have the ability to do that. You control your destiny. All those things come into play. And again, it's a lot of those topics we've talked about and discussed in the past, because all of this is interrelated,
Yeah.
interwoven.
You,
It's not a
you said,
standalone thing.
yeah, you said something, Joe, that kind of it jumped out at me. And you said, you know, and I'm not sure if it was these exact words just now, but you've said it and it before, if not now. And I think you just said, but taking it all in. You said open the aperture and take it all in. And I think that's important because by doing that, if we do the you know camera or photography analogy, that aperture does just that. It doesn't take just a piece of that picture. It takes it all in for you to
Right.
interpret,
Yeah.
not just one piece of it. And even if it's small, even if it's like just this part that they get in the picture, they're still taking all of that in. And
Right.
for the listeners, I'm pointing out just a single spot on my forehead. So it's like, even within that small area, there is so much information. So, it's important to keep in mind the big picture. And if we talk about from a professional perspective, taking it all in and opening the aperture means, how is what you're doing affecting other departments, teams, and organizations? And how is what
Right.
they're doing affecting you positively and negatively? And once you understand that, have those conversations. How can you help each other become better? How can you fill in those gaps? How can you mitigate those opportunities that may be hindering or impeding you, or causing bottlenecks? And same on the personal side. What are you doing with yourself personally that's preventing you or obstructing you or facilitating you to get to the next area? So keeping that aperture open and taking it all in, looking at the whole picture, not just that piece that's comfortable for you
Right.
or
Yep.
that you like or your favorite color. What is the big picture saying that you can glean something from in the smallest detail? What can you pick up on from that picture and apply that to make things better? To open your mind, to open your perspective, broaden that perspective, as we've mentioned before in other episodes. Keeping that aperture open and understanding the impacts, positive and negative, not just from your area, but from those around you, going back and forth.
And Dave, I think that's a very important piece of this, especially on a professional level. So, typically when we think of an organization, there's so many different departments, and in a lot of cases, each organization or part of the organization, each department or division always thinks their piece is more important
Yeah,
than the
yeah.
others. And so, just what you said, though, understanding and keeping that aperture open to understand the positive and negative impacts that what you're doing has on the other organization. And that's where I think the struggle is, that in a lot of cases these organizations don't come together like that. They don't
Mm.
take the time to understand how
It's
we
that
impact one
siloing.
another.
Yeah.
Yeah, they stay siloed. And again, they think their thing is the most important. I experienced that as an aircraft mechanic in the Air Force, where as maintainers we thought, hey, without the air, if we didn't have airplanes, the Air Force wouldn't exist, right? So all we thought of was maintainers the most important. It wasn't until I moved over to medical and understood what they did,
Mhm.
learned more about what their mission and how they contributed to the mission, and then moving to the wing level and working with the operations group, and then the mission support group, and understanding how we all fit together. It really wasn't until I saw the bigger picture where I understood the impact we all had on the
Mhm.
organization. And so that's now has been my mission, my own personal mission, to help people understand the bigger picture.
Mhm.
And once you have done that, you may keep that aperture open to see how you can improve it, how you can change it, and again help other people along the way see those same things. And so that's been a huge learning for me. And so I know people struggle with that, especially if you're limited on that access to other areas, especially like in the again in the professional environment where you're siloed, so to speak, to a certain area, and you
Mhm.
very rarely take the time to understand how what you do impacts your peers and colleagues in the other departments. And that's where a lot of confusion or some of the disruption in those organizations occurs, just because nobody's taking the time to really understand the impact that it has on other people. And so
Yeah.
I
And
think that was very important the way you said that, helping you understand how you remain open,
Mhm.
your aperture remaining open, and how you can improve by communicating with others and helping
Mhm.
them see that same thing.
Yeah, and I think it's important to distinguish, the difference between a siloed environment and a matrixed environment, and they're almost complete opposites. One, you're so narrow you don't see outside of your area, and then the matrix organization, it can be there's too many people trying to do the same thing.
Right.
And what you really need is a collaborative environment.
Right. Yep.
People understand their responsibilities, but they also understand how they impact and affect each other positively and negatively, and they come together and collaborate to make sure that everyone is working together positively to help each other. So someone's not creating a deficit for someone or creating more work for someone that needs to than is needed. And the way I kind of visualize this is like a supply chain in a manufacturing where, I'm the best supply chain manager. And I've got all these bottles lined up. I've got 5 million bottles, but I'm only producing one bottle of whatever every hour. So there's a huge backlog. So
Right.
why
Yep.
is that? If we were to work
Yep.
together, we could streamline that so it's a little
Yep.
bit more,
Absolutely.
it flows a lot better. So it's not a siloed, it's not a matrix, it's a collaborative environment is what we're really talking about, because that's how you get through these things. That's why you keep your aperture open, and is to understand and ask those questions, and be able to ask those questions without fear of repercussion or being diminished. Some of it's curiosity and some of it you just should know because it's helping you and your colleagues. And the same at home. I mean, if you and your family are siloed, what's really going on? Are you really communicating? We're not saying you,
Right.
as a parent, you have to be a child, or as a child you have to be a parent. You have your roles, but you have to understand each other and what those roles are and what you're doing to help facilitate the growth of each other. So
Dave, it's funny, you talked about the supply chain scenario, and that actually happened to me when I worked at another organization. We actually did exactly what you said. We did, a collaborative event where we all got the key players, that was involved in the situation. And it was a supply chain issue where supplies would come into the factory, and from the day it landed at the docks to the day it shipped out, there was a huge gap, a long time associated with that turnover or
mhm.
transition. And nobody understood why until we all met. Again, those key stakeholders all met and said, "This is our process. This is what we do." And then the next organization or group said, "This is our process. This is what we do." And once we all realized how we all contributed it to
Yep.
that process, we had a better understanding of where the gaps were, and it
Mhm.
improved our efficiency tremendously just by, again, everybody understand what their piece of the pie was and how we could correct that. So that
That's
was a
excellent. That's a great
perfect
example.
scenario. Yeah, perfect scenario of where us understanding the impact we're having on others, and remaining open to. And that was the other thing we couldn't, well, and that's the way it started off, though, was a shouting match and it's your fault. It's, until we again took the time to really understand that impact on each one of those areas, that we were able to come to a resolution and
Yeah.
to
If you
fix the
take away the
process.
blame and just focus on
Right.
how we can come together to
How to
solve an
improve it.
issue,
Yep.
then it's a win-win
Yep.
for everybody. Instead of saying, oh, it's Joe's fault, oh, it's Dave's fault, and we're sitting here pointing fingers, and say, instead just say, okay, we get it. Dave feels it's
We
Joe, Joe
have an
feels it's
issue.
Dave. We have an
Right.
issue. Okay, that's been established. Put that aside. Now, what can we do to fix this? What'll work for Joe? What'll work for Dave? Maybe it's, can you do this? No, I can't, but I can do that. And you
Right.
find out what's going to work based upon your capabilities and what you know, and apply what you have. A plug
Right.
for one of our
Absolutely.
previous
Yep.
episodes. So it's like, we're all on this team together, and the only way that we're going to succeed as a team is to be a team. you
Right.
know so that
So
that's just the business 101.
right. Well, and I want to go back to also, you mentioned also the family environment where you want to make sure all your, say your kids, you're the parent, you got kids, you want to make sure they're all equally growing. And so again, it goes back to that understanding of what their needs are. How can I, um, improve them, make them better, help them grow. And part of that again is learning them individually.
Yeah.
You
Not
know what
everyone's an artist, not everyone's an
Absolutely.
athlete,
Well,
not everyone's an
and
intellectual. It's
what
like,
motivates them, what,
yeah.
gets them started, so understanding those things. And we talked about this in the past, one kid you may do this
Mhm.
to help them. The other kids you may do that. But that's part of it, just like you just said, in the, job scenario, the professional environment where, me and you are having a conflict and we try and figure out what our pain points are, what helps us. That's the same with our kids. If
Mhm.
you can't just say I'm going to raise all of my kids. I have 3 kids. I couldn't say we're going to raise all 3 of our kids the exact same way. Give them all the exact same thing.
Be kind of a weird experiment. I'm sure it violates some something
Not
somewhere.
necessarily, but just think about it. If as a parent, you have 3 different kids, say that born like our kids were all 2
That's
years
why parenting
apart.
isn't easy, Joe.
It's not. But that's what I'm saying. Some people may think of that
Yeah.
approach that, okay, I raised the first one this way, I'm going to raise the second one this way. They're going to have the
Yeah.
same rules, the same things apply. But as you learn as a parent, the first kid typically you're like just terrified. Okay, what do I do? I don't want to mess them up. I don't want them, So you really ginger in a lot of cases. You're really trying to figure this out. Then the second kid comes along. You're like, well, we've been through this once before, and realize, okay, we can do this differently. And then the third kid comes along. You're like, okay, that kid can raise itself. I mean, you to that point almost.
Just give them the keys to the car and tell them
Right.
to go to work.
Right, because again, you've altered your style, you've
Right.
changed, and you've seen what worked and what didn't work, and so
And that's part of keeping your aperture open.
absolutely, and again, instead of staying rigid and doing it all the kids the same, doing all these things, and so that's all, again, just keeping your mind open to the possibilities that kids are going to be different, environment's going to be different, the things they see are going to be different. Just keeping all those things in mind. And so that's why I just want to again touch on that. The family environment. It's no different than the professional environment where you're really
Mhm.
just trying to understand the situation, and
Yeah.
then go from there. How can I improve it? How can I make it better?
Yeah.
And like I say, typically your first kid is that kind of test, see what sticks kind of stuff. So that kid may get very strict rules, may get a lot of the things because again, you're unsure. This is the test model. You got to figure out what works and what doesn't. And then
The
the second
beta.
kid, yeah, I mean, basically it is. It's the beta. Okay, this kid maybe had some things different. Then the second kid comes along. It's
That's
like,
funny.
okay, you do some things different. So yeah. So again, it's
Hopefully the
just that
pendulum doesn't swing too far in the
too
opposite
far
direction.
right. And yeah, that was kind of my analogy before. The first kid is strict, and the third kid you just give them the keys. Now, that hopefully that's not the case,
Right.
but again, you kind of figure things out, and that's the same with anything you do. You go into it maybe not knowing or understanding, but as you start to develop that understanding, then you can start to change it up. You can start to see and then we said this before, not everything we talk about is going to apply to you. Pick and
Yeah.
choose those things that apply to you, and make it your own. And so it could start as, what we've, provided, and then it turns to something totally different because
Mhm.
that's what works best for you.
Yeah.
And that's okay. It's just taking, uh, and you said it earlier, your interpretation of what that means or how it applies. I think that's very important, that
Eh,
again, it's yours. It should not be dictated. Again, these are just helpful suggestions or anything
mhm.
that people provide you. If you read a leadership book, are you going to follow everything in there? Probably not, because it's not going to make you know sense in every aspect of it. So, because again, when that person wrote that book, things were different,
Yeah.
and that even if it's just a month old, things have already changed. So you can't apply those same rules and things that you learned in that book. You can
Mhm.
apply some of the concepts,
Yeah.
and then apply them to the thing
Yeah.
that you're applying it to. But that's just just again, that your interpretation of it, how you use it, is still going to be up to you. And I
Yeah.
think that's very important, that you apply it where you need. And that's,
Yeah.
again, the
And I
recommendation
think
I always have.
the other piece of this is, it could be argued, well, what if it's too much information? What if the aperture is always open or it's too open? Well,
Right.
then bring it down a little bit. Maybe you don't need to see the whole globe if you're trying to focus in on just one state, so focus in on what you need to focus in on, but be open to that what you're focusing on. So sometimes if your aperture is too open, it can be overwhelming. There's too much
Yeah.
information. So you might need to close a little bit. We're not saying close it all, but just narrow it a little bit. So where you have a little bit of focus. It's kind of like when you take that picture or you're getting ready to, you gotta maybe zoom in a little bit to get
Right.
to
Right.
get the right picture. It's like if we were to pan out, you'd see, my office and my bookshelves and everything that's there. And it's like, well, that's too much information. We want you to
Right.
focus a little bit narrower, but then take all of that part in. So,
Right.
or
No,
that part in.
yeah, I think that's appropriate that you sometimes shut out the additional noise.
Yeah, the noise. Yeah,
Absolutely, that
distractions.
makes sense because you're right. It could be overwhelming, and that was kind of the conversation me and Dave were having earlier. It's just your mind gets spinning, and then you start thinking, okay, what about this? What? And then you're right. It just continues to open it until you just say, you know what? That's it. I'm going to
You gotta
stop
reel it in a
right
little
here.
bit. Yep, you gotta
Yep.
reel it in.
And so that's absolutely correct because that's why I say a lot of nights I don't sleep is just because I have so many things swirling around in my head of what could be or how
Right.
can I. And so now Dave has a very good point that we don't want you again to become narrow minded again or just centrally focused, but at the same time, and I even said this in a previous episode about you see the big picture, but you can't do it all at once. So
Mhm.
maybe you break it down, and like Dave said, you go from a global view down to just a state view or a city
Yeah,
view, but it leads to the bigger picture. So
yeah.
that's the thing, is that it stays aligned with your ultimate goal.
Yeah,
So
and I was just going to say it that you have to have a goal, you have to have a mark that you're trying to hit. So
right. Yeah. Yeah. Because it wouldn't make sense if you have this, you do narrow it down, but that narrowed down focus ends up taking you in the opposite direction
yeah,
where you don't meet your ultimate goal or the end state because you've now taken a totally different direction. So, but that's okay if that's the conscious choice too. Okay, I'm going to pause on everything. I'm going to freeze on this. I'm going to switch gears. That's fine too.
yeah,
But yeah, we just again, when we talk about open the aperture, it's just again remain open to those potential things that might sneak in or that might come, and maybe you just make that narrow focus on, okay, if these things come around, then I'll accept those or I'll continue to view those things as needed or acceptable, but other things may just be noise. And so
yeah.
I'll just shut them down or push them aside.
So I'm gonna throw out my final thoughts. Keep your aperture open, keep your mind open. If you open your mind too much and you start realizing that there's some noise and stuff like that, bring it down a little bit. Don't close it off,
Right.
but find that middle ground where you can focus on what you need to and really explore some of the depths of what that big picture looks like, and find those points that'll benefit and understand the big picture, how you're impacting others, how others are impacting you, and have that good collaborative discussion to find a meaningful resolution that's going to work for everyone and benefit everyone, that win-win, if you will. So that's all I have to say about that.
Okay. Well, thanks for
Mhm.
that, Dave. I mean, you close with some very good things. I think one of the biggest things is that collaborative piece, really understanding how what you do, what others do impacts you negatively or positively, and then just keeping that open line of communication to help people understand that. I think that's one of the challenges we all face, especially in
Yeah,
organizations that again, most people are so happy and proud of their own entity, their own department, their own division, that they fail to see, the big picture, how it impacts everyone. And so, like I said, I experienced that myself, just being in a certain environment, and it wasn't until I started to see the bigger picture that it made sense. So, well, that's why it's important to, again, keep your mind open to the possibilities, opening that aperture to the potential. And like I said, I might not have coined this phrase. Somebody may have already done it, but just being a dream chaser. And again, not just to have your head in the clouds, but to really think about, more than the sky is the limit. I mean, you can achieve a lot of things. So just keeping that in mind. So with that, we will go ahead and end this episode. And again, thanks for tuning in to this episode. Again, if it's your first time and you enjoyed what we're talking about or discussing, then feel free to share it, pass it on to friends. Or if not, if this is not your cup of tea, if you know somebody may benefit from this, please feel free to pass this on. Like I said, me and Dave enjoyed doing this, having a conversation, and just helping one person out of this whole thing we've done.
Yeah.
I think we've succeeded. Again, it's well worth the time that we put into this. So thanks for tuning in. Again, if there's something you want to hear or for us to discuss, please leave comments or reach out to us. Our information should be in the description. But with that, we just want to encourage you to continue being your not so ordinary you.